Please stand as you are able for the reading of the gospel. Our gospel today is from John, the 3rd chapter. Now there was a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a leader of the Jews. He came to Jesus by night and said to him, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do apart from the presence of God." Jesus answered him, "Very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God without being born from above." Nicodemus said to him, "How can anyone be born after having grown old? Can one enter a second time into the mother's womb and be born?" Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God without being born of water and spirit. What is born of the flesh is flesh, and what is born of the spirit is spirit. Do not be astonished that I said to you, you must be born from above. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit." Nicodemus said to him, "How can these things be?" Jesus answered him, "Are you a teacher of Israel, and yet you do not understand these things? This is the gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God." You may be seated. Well, according to a study that was done by the Pew Research Center in 2012, worldwide, more than 8 in 10 people identify with a religious group. They estimated that there are 5.8 billion religiously affiliated adults and children worldwide, representing 84% of the 2010 world population of 6.9 billion people. You may be wondering how that study breaks down the various religions. Well, 32% of the world's population identify as Christians. That is roughly 2.2 billion people. 23%, or 1.6 billion, identify as Muslim. 15% are Hindus. 500 million, or 7%, are Buddhist. And out of the major world religions, Judaism comes up at 14 million people, or a mere 0.2%. It's also interesting to note that the third largest group didn't even make that list. At 16.3% are the unaffiliated with any religious tradition. That would be roughly 1 out of every 5 people. Now, those are just the broad brushstrokes of the religious or non-religious landscape of our world. If we dive a little bit deeper into the actual faith traditions of how those religions are lived out, there are thousands upon thousands of variations, values, and specific ways within each one. Just because someone says they are of one religion does not mean that it is the same as everyone else in that group. For instance, in Christianity alone, some experts argue that there are over 30,000 versions of it. Jesus may be the ultimate Sunday school answer and the common thread that links it all together, but there are many organized denominations that have different ways of accessing these teachings. I mean, some of the ones that we can name off the top of our head would be Catholicism, the mainline Protestants, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, the Evangelicals, the Orthodox Christians, just to name a few. Now, Lord of Life, this one community of faith, would fall into that Protestant category of the Lutheran variety as part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, also known as the ELCA, which has an estimated number of 3.4 million members in the church body. And that has some significant differences from the other Protestant denominations, and even more significant differences from the other Lutheran denominations that would fall into the same subset. How the life of faith is lived out looks different in this space than it does from the church down the road or in the next town. We may have the same scriptures, creeds, and practices, but how we talk of our faith will emphasize different parts. We can be similar, having something that brings us together, and yet different. And if that isn't complicated enough, I'm fairly certain that if we were to take this time to talk to each other about how we live out our faith traditions individually, that there are many variations even in this room based on our experiences and our upbringing. So to sum this all up, if you have met one Christian or one Muslim or one Buddhist, well, then you've only met one Christian, one Muslim, or one Buddhist. Our faith traditions that we ascribe to, wherever we may be at in our journey, are kind of like learning a language. Because as humans, we need to communicate with one another. We need to have shared symbols and words and expressions, because we are designed for community and relationship. The languages that we know the best are the ones we're immersed in our home, in our workplaces, and our schools. And it's always an ongoing process, changing, adapting, learning the new lingo and slang. Well, faith traditions function similarly. We're most comfortable with the ones that we spend time in. We can choose to accept or reject the teachings of the places that we go to, and can seek expressions of faith that bring us closer to God or the Creator that we believe in. Faith traditions and religions are about communicating how and where we find belonging in this world. They give us guidelines for living with each other, and most have explanations of where we go or what happens when this life is over. But I need to pause for a moment, because you did not come here for an anthropology lesson, and you did not ask me what the world religions are, or how each one practices its faith. Instead, the question at hand is why? Why are there so many faith traditions in the world? And that is a really hard and holy question, which is probably why it ended up here in this summer series. Now, it's hard because, at least for me, this why question comes from a place of wanting certainty and knowledge, wanting to feel confident in my faith tradition, wanting to know for certain that it is the right one. With the variety to choose from, doubt has a sneaky way of popping up. And traditionally, specifically in Christianity, doubt has functioned as something that is not talked about. Doubt messes with confidence. And when questions of the afterlife are also on the line, it's not something that I personally want to get wrong. Now, in today's gospel reading, we encounter another man wrestling with some of these same questions. They may not be, why are there so many faith traditions, but Nicodemus is noticing something about Jesus that is different than the faith traditions that they were living into. Now, Nicodemus was a Pharisee in the Jewish community of Jesus' day, and what Jesus had been saying and doing was familiar enough with their teachings, but also different enough to make him wonder what was happening. Jesus was performing miracles and showing signs of God's power. He was preaching messages that he himself was fulfilling their scriptures, which would have sounded a little heretical to Nicodemus. So Nicodemus's question, if he were to ask it so boldly, might have been, why are you messing with our faith? Now remember that these are two Jewish rabbis getting together for a deep conversation. I know Pharisees get a bad rap in the Bible, but they would have been presumably on the same team, rooting for the same things, trying to lead people towards the same God. So Nicodemus's concerns are as important as they are hard to bring up. Have you ever been in that place? Uncertain if you should say anything at all out of fear of getting it wrong or sounding dumb? I know I have. And my inner self, who loves anthropology lessons and structure and straightforward answers, slightly cringes at Jesus' reply. Instead of yes or no or any matter of clarity, Jesus talks of the kingdom of God. You know, that spiritual place where God reigns and fulfillment actually occurs. Small things. And that the wind of the Spirit will blow as the Spirit chooses, that no one knows where the Spirit is coming from or where it is going to, and that is how it is for everyone who is born of the Spirit. Now, if you understand this teaching, well, then you are smarter than I am, or Nicodemus for that matter, because he came in looking for clarity, wanting direct answers and confidence, but instead what he got was a tough lesson that seems to be meant to keep him confused. Jesus doesn't really answer his question and possibly even makes him feel slightly dumb for asking anything in the first place. Yet Jesus doesn't say these things to judge Nicodemus or his faith. He simply states them as a matter of fact, and possibly even as a way to reorient the faith traditions that they were living in. I mean, their faith tradition was at a point of change simply by Jesus' presence there. And this was the best way that he could explain what was happening, even though it leaves more questions than it gives answers for. According to theologian Barbara Brown Taylor, she writes, "This is a difficult teaching for those who want to feel secure in their relationship with God, especially if their security depends on knowing how things work, of when and where the Spirit is present, of who has access to it and who does not. What does it mean to be born of the Spirit? You do not know," Jesus says, "not because you are stupid, but because you are not God. So relax if you can, because you're not doing anything wrong. This is what it means to be human." So why? Why are there so many faith traditions? Well, like Nicodemus, I think we're left in the shadows on this one. There are so many faith traditions because the Spirit will blow in the lives of everyone as the Spirit chooses. And we're not able to fully know why God does what God does. And to be honest, if we were all created to know exactly what God does or to be exactly like God, that's bound to get really boring to know everything all the time. If we were created to all be the same or have the same expressions of faith, how would we learn from each other or grow or have the joy of an aha moment in our life or be so moved that we are moved to tears? We can be confident in our beliefs without having to condemn others. Now, it's quite a wonder that God created us as human beings in the first place, as imperfect, good, filled with emotions and reason, worthy of love. And to make everything the exact same misses the full point. That many faith traditions are essentially language that is less about God and more about what it means to be human. And hopefully, being human leads people closer to love, which is present not just in our religious landscape, but also our secular one. Love binds us together. And as Christians in a Lutheran church at this very moment, love encourages us to grow closer to the God that we believe in and provide a clear way to be in community with each other. I'm convinced that one of the most beautiful things that God has done with creation is the vast uniqueness with which God has created us and the world around. That there's depth and beauty and life within our diversity. That we become more fully human when we expand the reaches of our minds and engage with one another. When we do that, we get to experience God in more fullness. Not because we are convinced that we have it right, but because we can trust the God that we put our belief in, who leads us toward love. Even when we witness or engage in a faith practice that is not our own, we can learn something about the God who is beyond our understanding, who blows as the Spirit where the Spirit chooses. So relax if you can. You're not doing anything wrong. Trust God and love others. This is what it means to be human. Amen.